All right, we'll say good morning. Let us begin. We'll start with our sponsorships to thank all of our wonderful sponsors, to thank our Talmud Torah sponsors for the month of Nisan, to thank Czinn Teri Kahn for dedicating all the Shurim and Drushos this month. Gratitude to Hashem on welcoming their first grandchild, Adin Tzvi Hochbaum, Benjamin and Elys Wohl from Eretz Yisrael. The immense debt of gratitude to all those who help make the Shurim available beyond the confines of the Beis Midrash, specifically Moishe Abramson and Jeremy Lasson, Shimmy Batsheva Messing for dedicating all the Shurim and Drushos this month in honor of the Bas Mitzva of their daughter Lilah, and Paul and Kathy Pollack for dedicating all of the Shurim and Drushos this month in memory of Paul's parents, Shmuel and Zechariah, Leah Bas Avrohom, and his great-grandmother Tziril Bas Rav Dov. We thank our Week of Learning sponsors, Ira and Miriam Grossman. Welcome back, Ira, to the Shir. Baruch Hashem, back to Shul. With gratitude to Hashem for providing the ability to return to Shul in person for Daf Yomi and davening. And thank you to all of those who made Daf Yomi as well as the davening accessible over the last year. We thank Ira and Miriam for the sponsorship and welcome Ira back to Shul. Baruch haba. All right, so with that, let us begin. So we are picking up today's daf. We really had, it was such a privilege over the last two. I mean, it's a privilege every day, but the Gemaras over the last couple of days have been just nothing short of magnificently exceptional. So we'll say, and it continues. Really incredible Gemara today as well. So let us pick up Halacha Dalid, the Mishnah on Tes Vav Amud Aleph 15a. So the Mishnah says as follows. We'll both say quite interesting. Shtei lishkos hayu b'mikdash. There were two lishkos. Now remember again, a lishka, technically speaking, is a chamber. Not technically, is a chamber. Two chambers in the Beis Hamikdash. Achos lishkas chashoin, va'achos lishkas hakelim. One was called literally chashoin. I will say chashoin means secretive or whispering. So one was called, sounds like a Harry Potter installment, right? The chamber of whispers, or one was called the chamber of whispers or secrets. Va'achos lishkas hakelim, and one was called the chamber of the utensils. Lishkas chashoin, what happened in the chamber of whispers? This is incredible. Yirei chet, those who feared sin. So also I want to point something out to you. It's very interesting. If you notice, over the last 2 days, we've seen two different terms to describe pious individuals. Right? In yesterday's daf, what did we see? Remember a little chazara? Chassid, right? And we saw two different definitions for a chassid. Either, again, the chassid was the person who went ahead and dug ditches, dug watering holes, right? Dug wells. So the chassid is someone who does for others. So here it's interesting. The Gemara says, Yirei chet. Who's the Yirei chet? The Gemara says, Nostin l'socha b'chashai. They used to give, I will say, we're going to see the chamber of secrets or of whispers was used as a tzedakah distribution mechanism. So what would happen? You would go ahead and deposit money there anonymously. Socha b'chashai, va'aniyim b'nei tovim misparnasin b'socha b'chashai, and aniyim paupers would come and would be able to receive money from it secretly. Now, this is there's two things that's happening over here. So essentially, this was a tzedakah distribution mechanism. So people who wanted to give tzedakah anonymously would come and drop off their money. Now, it's interesting. Who was this particular distribution mechanism geared for? It was geared for the Gemara, what the Mishnah calls aniyim b'nei tovim, which refers to people who were once wealthy, lost their wealth, and are now impoverished. See, I will say, it's difficult in general. It's difficult for anyone to take tzedakah. But when a person was once wealthy and now they're in a situation where they have to accept charity, it's even more difficult. This chamber was designed specifically for those kind of individuals. So remember again, we've learned throughout our journeys in Shas that in organized community, there were many mechanisms for tzedakah distribution, right? Most notably, we had just recently in Arvei Pesachim, the tamchui, the soup kitchen. There were always ways to distribute to the poor. The challenging demographic was this aniyim b'nei tovim. So for them, they had this specific chamber. So we'll say, what was the gadlus of it? When somebody was walking into that chamber, you didn't know what? Why they were going in. Were they going in to contribute, or were they going in to withdraw? This way, again, the dignity of the aniyim was maintained. If you take a look at the Tiklin Chadatin, he says, Lishkas Chashoim, Ashim Shenostin Lasocha Beseser, because you contribute to it furtively, secretly, right, anonymously. So I will say those who contribute give so anonymously and quietly, and those who go ahead and withdraw do so also anonymously and quietly. Lishkas Akelim, that's the chamber of whispers. What about the chamber of the utensils? Whoever would go ahead and contribute or would donate a kli, a utensil. Zarko l'socho, you would throw your utensil into this chamber. V'achas l'shloshim yom hagizbarn poscheno. So once every 30 days, they would go ahead and check the chamber. The chol kli shematzu bo tzarech lebedek habayis manicheno. So any utensil that they could literally use for temple upkeep, they would keep. V'ashar nimkarin udemeyen noflim lishkas bedek habayis. And the rest of the utensils that were there would ultimately be sold off and the monies deposited into the Bedek Habayis fund. Incredible. But it says the Gemara. Rabbi Yaakov bar Idi, Rabbi Yitzchak bar Nachman. I will say this is beautiful Gemara. We're going to speak a little bit now about Hilchos Tzedakah and about the right way to give Tzedakah. So the Gemara says, Rabbi Yaakov bar Idi, Rabbi Yitzchak bar Nachman, Havu Parnosim. They were heads of the community. V'havu Yavin l'Rabbi Chama Avuye Rab Yoshaya Dinar v'hu Yahiv le'Licharan. So this is very interesting. Rav Yaakov bar Idi and Rabbi Yitzchak bar Nachman were heads of the community. Yet when it came to tzedakah distribution, interestingly enough, they would give money to Rav Chama Abuye or Rav Chama, and Rav Chama would go ahead and distribute the money to the aniyim. Now, what's the pshat? Why couldn't they distribute it themselves? So once again, take a look at the Tiklin Chadatin. La'choranin, la'ocharonin, mipnei shoyim mispaishim lekabel miyad hagabai, v'nostan lahem mashalakach shu lahayatzar. So let's listen to this. Interestingly enough, sometimes the pauper is embarrassed to take from the gabbai tzedakah. Maybe he knows the guy by tzedakah. Maybe he's just embarrassed because he used to be a community leader himself. So interestingly enough, you have examples over here of Rav Yaakov bar Idi, Rabbi Yitzchak bar Nachman, who were the leaders, but yet they understood that the more effective mechanism for tzedakah distribution was actually to give the money to someone else, which is really, really quite fascinating. Rabbi Zechariah, Chasnei Rabbi Levi, listen to this, this is an incredible story. Rabbi Zechariah, who was the son-in-law of Rabbi Levi, Hayu Hakol Malizin Alav. Everyone used to go ahead and speak negatively about him. What would they say? Amrin Delo Tzarech V'hu Nasif. We'll say a terrible rumor. What was the rumor? That he did not actually need tzedakah money, but yet he took it for himself. That was the rumor that was going around. That he was taking tzedakah funds for his own use. Min Dadamach, when he died, Badkin, they checked into his financial affairs. And what did they find? They saw that he would go ahead and distribute it to the poor. I will say, so you see what was happening over here? You see, he used to take tzedakah money and go ahead and distribute it, but he never told anybody about it because he did not want to become known as the tzedakah collector. Because then what would happen? Anytime you would see him dispersing money to someone, you would assume that's what? That they were an ani. So the whole point is he never disclosed the fact that he was distributing tzedakah funds. So because that he was able to go ahead and distribute to the poor without the poor feeling stigmatized. It was incredible. It's such an incredible Gemara because first of all, the Gemara wants to sensitizing us. You don't really know what's happening in people's lives. You know, we have this kind of reflex to engage in snap judgment, right? We automatically know what everybody's doing. We automatically know what the cheshbon is. We automatically know what everybody's intentions are. And so often we're wrong. And we're wrong in such dramatic ways. See, here Nebuchadnezzar will say, everyone suspected this individual, everybody suspected Rabbi Zechariah of pilfering communal charity funds. And it turned out that when he died, they did an audit of his books. And it turns out that he was distributing money for tzedakah. We'll also point out, if you notice, by the way, how does the Yerushalmi refer to a poor person? It's an interesting word. Choranin. So we'll say, what does choranin mean? We just came off of Pesach. What does choranin mean? chorin, free. You know, the Maharal writes, right? The Maharal Prague writes, he says, Ein lecha ben chorin gadol yoser min ha'ani. The greatest form of freedom is poverty. Say to yourself, what does that mean? Well, so we know that when you have possessions, you are a slave to your possessions. That's the reality of it, right? And the more you have, the more meshubad you are. To a certain degree, ironically, the pauper is free, which is, again, now poverty obviously comes with its own set of challenges, and I think most of us would choose the challenges of wealth over the challenges of poverty. But it is fascinating to see that the ani is referred to as a ben chorin, ultimately is referred to, in any event, the Gemara goes weiter. Rabbi Chinina bar Papa have a maflig mitzvah balayla. Great story. Rabbi Chinina bar Papa was one time distributing tzedakah at night. He was running around that night distributing tzedakah. What happened? Paga bei Ravhun Diruchaya. He ran into almost like the head shade, right? That literally Ruchai means evil spirit. So at night the evil spirits are given an opportunity to kind of run around. So he ran into one of these evil spirits, but not just anyone, like the heady evil spirit. Amrli Lokain Alfin Rebbe. Lo sasig v'orecha. So listen to this. So the shade says to Rabbi Chinina, he says, Rabbi, didn't you teach lo sasig v'orecha? Lo sasig v'orecha means you can't move the property marker on your friend's property. Right? So you can't go ahead and readjust your friend's property. You have to steal his property. So the shade was giving Rabbi Chinina some musar. Nighttime is my domain. What are you running around distributing tzedakah at night? Amarle v'lo ksiv, v'lo chen ksiv, matan b'seiser yichape af. But the pasuk also says, giving tzedakah secretly has the ability to overcome divine wrath. So again, Rabbi Chinina bested the shade, and the shade ultimately again became fearful of him and ran away. Pretty incredible. Rabbi Yonah. Rabbi said this is a beautiful, beautiful and important Gemara. Rabbi Yonah. Ashrei nosin ladal in ksiv ella ashrei maskil el dal. We'll say amazing enough. The Gemara says the pasuk in Tehillim does not go ahead and say ashrei nosin dal. Doesn't say praiseworthy is the person who gives tzedakah to the poor. Rather, what does it say? Ashrei maskil el dal. Praiseworthy is the one who approaches the dal, the pauper, with wisdom. What does this mean, Rabbi Hossein? Zeshu mistakel b'mitzvah heich la'asosa. Rabbi Hossein, we know this, that in the mitzvah of tzedakah, it is not just about what you give, but it is all about how you give it. And that's the meaning of the pasuk in Tehillim. Ashrei maskil el dal. Praiseworthy is the one who approaches the pauper with seichel. You know, Rabbi Hossein, you know this, sometimes you could give a lot of money to someone, but totally undermine the mitzvah by making the person feel worthless. Conversely, you could give a lot less, but yet give in a way that maintains a person's self-esteem, that maintains a person's self-worth, and that ultimately, again, means the world to the individual. Ketzad haya Rabbi Yonah osa. What would Rabbi Yonah do? Kishaya roa ani ben tovim bosa. This is incredible. It's an example of this, of Ashrei maskil el dal. When Rabbi Yonah would see an ani ben tovim bosa, once again you have this phrase. Ani ben tovim is this person who was wealthy, and then again lost his wealth, and now was forced to rely on tzedakah. When Rabbi Yonah would encounter such an individual, what would he do? So he said, Omer lo, b'ni, b'shvil sheshamati shenafla l'cha Yerusha makom acher, tol va'ata poreya minda havanasa. I'm sorry, va'ata poreya. So also listen to this. So Rabbi Yonah would say as follows. When he would see a particular pauper who was wealthy and then lost his money, he would say, I heard that you are going to have a Yerusha, that there's a Yerusha that's going to fall to you from another place. So let me do this. Let me give you an advance on that Yerusha, right? And you'll pay me back when you get the Yerusha. So since Rabbi Yonah was structuring this as a business, I'm giving you an advance, you'll pay me back. Mandahava nasiv hava, once the pauper would take the money, Amrlei, matana hilacha. Rabbi Yonah whispered to him, it's a matana. See, Rabbi say that's ashrei maskil el dal. That praiseworthy is the one who approaches the giving of tzedakah with sech. And I will say, it's not just the din in tzedakah. Tzedakah is the paradigmatic example of this, but we know in life that in general, it's not just what you do, but it's also all about how you do it. A person could have the most wonderful intentions, and a person can want to do the most wonderful things, but the mechanism in which you execute those noble goals is just as important as the goal or as the maaseh itself. So the Gemara goes weiter. Chia bar Ada Islay Savin. So I'll say Chia bar Ada used to interact with these particular elderly gentlemen who were poor. Biyominon, so the Gemara says, Biyominon, man dahava havlen mi ben Rosh Shasa l'tzuma rabba havanaspin. They would accept tzedakah between Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. So, however, min basar came lo havanaspin amrin deshasa gaban. So this is very interesting. So these individuals would accept tzedakah only between Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. But after Yom Kippur, they wouldn't accept tzedakah because they would say, whatever the Ribono Shel Olam has in store for us, he has already been gozer, right? He's already established. Interesting, because remember, Parnasa is set. Parnasa is set during Aseret Simei Tshuva. So in that flux time, so to speak, they would accept tzedakah. After that time, they would no longer accept tzedakah. Interestingly enough, there's a little bit of a machlokes in the Karban Ha'eda and the Tiklin Chadatin, exactly how to understand this particular Gemara, but you'll see it on your own. So the Gemara goes weiter. Nechemya ish shichin pagabo Yerushalmi echad. So we'll say this is a beautiful Gemara. We'll see. Nechemya from Sichin, right? That's where he was from. It's from Sichin. He once bumped into a particular Yerushalmi. Right? We'll say, isn't it incredible just to be identified as a Yerushalmi? Right? That's it. Not a name Yerushalmi. I see that Rav Nachman is here with us, and Jerry's on with us. So, we have a couple of Yerushalmim here with us as well. So, isn't it incredible just to be identified as the Yerushalmi? So, the Gemara says, Amar le zacha imi chada tarnagolsa. So, listen to this. The Yerushalmi said to him, do me a favor and acquire with me a tarnagolsa. We'll say tarnagolsa is a hen. Now, you have to understand something. That was considered to be the finest delicacy. The finest delicacy. This lashon of zacheimi, partner with me, was just a kind of coded way of asking for tzedakah. He was asking for tzedakah. So the man obviously was very wealthy at some point in time, had a refined palate, and asked Nehemiah for money for a fine hen. So Amrle, halacha tumisa dekupad. So he said, no, I said, I'm not giving you money for a fine hen, but I'll give you money for a piece of meat. Right, so you can go buy yourself a piece of meat. So what happened? V'zabin kupad v'achal umis. Ultimately, the ani, the Yerushalmi, bought a piece of meat and he died. He ate it and he died. I was supposed to say that again, whatever the situation was, he had become accustomed to owning the finest things in life, and as a result, when he ate this, again, it was a bit too much for him, and he died. V'havet savach, and Nehemiah was very distressed. V'amar bo v'siptu lahargo shel. Come and eulogize the one who Nehemiah killed. That Nehemiah mamish felt that he was responsible for the demise of this individual. Why? I will say again, Ashrei maskil el dal, because the mitzvah of tzedakah is not just about giving money. The mitzvah of tzedakah is about being sensitive to the needs of the individual. So Nehemiah lamented the fact, it sounds like a strange request, right? It's like someone coming along saying, you know what, I'm running a little bit short on my lease payments for my Bentley. If you don't mind, can you mind helping out a little bit? You'd say, you know what, maybe not. Here's a couple of dollars, but I'm not. So this guy approaches Nehemiah for a fine hen. But meanwhile, so Nehemiah's reflexive reaction, which makes a lot of sense, is maybe not. Maybe if you can't afford it, it's good to go ahead and not collect for such expensive appetites. But what he didn't realize is that maybe, again, this is what this individual became accustomed to, physically accustomed to. And Nehemiah felt incredible guilt because he killed him. Nachum ish gamzu. Both I get ready for this Gemara. Nachum ish gamzu. Haya mahalich molich beis darla. Haya molich darla beis chama. Listen to this. So Nachum ish gamzu was going ahead and bringing a gift to his father-in-law. Beautiful. Paga bo mukashchin echad. There was a particular individual, both said mukashchin literally means a person afflicted with boils, but it could also just be a descriptive term for any person who's very ill. So mukashchin. Amrle zachi mimi ma'de iskabech. So he says to Nachum, can you give me a little bit of what you're carrying? right? Could I share in that? Amrali Michzer. So Nachum said, yeah, when I come back, on my way back, I'll share with you. So what happened? Chazar v'ashkechei mis. So Nachum returned, and he saw ultimately again that by the time he returned, the pauper had died. V'hava Amar, so the Gemara says, and Nachum was incredibly distressed. V'hava Amar lekable ene dechaminach v'lo yismon l'cha yistamyon. The eyes that saw you but did not have compassion on you should be blind. Yodei delo pashtan misanlach yiskatun. The hands that did not extend food to you or something to you should be cut off. Raglaya delo rahatan lemesanlach. The feet that did not run to give you, yistabrun, should be broken. And the Gemara says, umatase kain. And all of these things, in fact, happened to Nachum ish Gamzu. So we'll say, I just want to point out just the profundity of this Gemara. That we'll say, what an incredible it's not a metaphor; it's a literal story. But how many times in life does it happen? Does it happen where I'm doing something, an opportunity presents itself, and what do I say to the opportunity? On my way back, later on. And then, whenever the later on is, people have later ons, people have different durations of later on. Some people later on means an hour, some people later on means a decade, some people later on means 50 years. And then what happens when you decide to finally come back to the opportunity is gone. The opportunity is gone. This is the nature. This is a metaphor for the human condition. How many beautiful and precious opportunities slip through our fingers simply because when they present themselves, we're unwilling to avail themselves of the opportunity right then and there. So Nachum ish Gamzu is so distressed, so upset about this. So what happens? So he curses himself. The eyes that saw you should go blind, right? The hands should be cut off. The feet should be broken. So the Gemara says, what happened? So the Gemara says, Salik legabe Rabbi Akiva. Rabbi Akiva came to see Nachum. Rabbi Akiva came to see Nachum. So what happened? Amrale, oy li shani roa oscha bechach. I am so sad that I have seen you in this state. Amrale, oy li she'in ani roa osach bechach. That's strange. So Nachum ish Gamzu says back to Rabbi Akiva, I'm so sad that you're not in the same state. So Amrale, at mekalalani, ma'at mekalani. So Rabbi Akiva is very taken aback. Are you cursing me? That I should be in the same state, blind, cut off, right, amputated arms, broken legs. Amrle, uma'at meva'it biyisurin. And Rabbi Akiva, are you afraid of suffering? So it's a fascinating exchange. It's a fascinating exchange. Obviously, again, so Nachum ish Gamzu was not literally wishing this upon Rabbi Akiva, but Rabbi Akiva was so sad to see Nachum ish Gamzu in such a compromised state, and Nachum ish Gamzu was essentially saying, don't be sad. Don't be sad. Life is all about properly dealing with your hardships. And everyone has their own hardships. Everyone has their own challenges, their own difficulties. And successful living is the ability to accept and to navigate your challenges, right? I will say in the world of challenges, there are two ways to deal with your challenges. You could bemoan them, you could bewail them, you could go ahead and be terribly just mournful over them and spend your life wondering why me, or you could accept, maximize, move on. So Nachum ish Gamzu said, don't mourn me, right? Don't feel bad for me. These are my yisurin, and I deal with them. I accept them, I move on, and I maximize. And Akiva, it's a good lesson for you, because whatever life throws your way, you should adopt the same mindset as on. I remember again how what an incredible foreshadow. This was Rabbi Akiva. Rabbi Akiva suffered terribly. Rabbi Akiva suffered terribly. Also remember again, Rabbi Akiva was the one who, remember again, as they were flaying the skin off his body. What was he doing? He was saying Shema. He was doing Makabal Olma Hushamayim. He said, my whole life I wondered, how am I going to be Makayim B'Yahavtas Hashem Elokecha B'chol Levavcha B'chol Nafshecha. So where did Rabbi Akiva get the chizik for that from? Maybe it was from this exchange. Maybe it was this exchange with Nachum ish Gamzu, where Nachum told him, don't be afraid of suffering. Whatever life throws your way, you can handle it. Accept it, maximize, and move forward. Maybe that's where Rabbi Akiva got the chizik, from this exchange here in Shekalim, perhaps. So we'll say the Gemara goes weiter. Ravoshia Rabba Hava Rabba Dibrei Chad Sagi Nuhura. Listen to this. So we'll say Ravoshia had a son, and he hired for his son a malamed, a teacher, and the teacher was blind. V'havi Yalif Echol Imei V'chol Yom, and Ravoshia was makbid to eat with the malamed, with the teacher, each and every day. A sign of deference for the teacher. The teacher was a chashuv Jew, a chashuv guy. So Moshe ate with him every single day. Okay, we'll say first wide line, Tesvav Medalef. End of the first line. Chadzman, Havali Archin, Velomatel Mecholi. So one day, Rav Moshe had guests, and therefore he was unable to dine with the blind malamed. Beram Shosalek Legabe, Amarle Lo Yichos Maralai, began the Havali Archin. Yomadin, the Amris, the Lo Liv Zui. Biyikra Demari Yomadin began Khan Lo Achalas Im Mari Yomadin. So Rav Oshia says, after the guests left, the next day, he comes to the blind teacher and he says, I just want to apologize, I want to ask you, Mechila, I didn't bring my guests to dine with me together with you. I dined with them separately from you because I was nervous that they would not afford you the right kavod. So please excuse me for not dining with you yesterday. So Moshe comes and he apologizes to the blind malamed for not going ahead and dining with him the previous day. So Moshe, look how beautiful this is. Amrle, so the blind malamed said to Raboshia, Ata payasta leman demischami velochami. You have appeased the one who is seen but does not see. That was a reference to himself, right? The blind malamed, he is seen by others, but he does not see. Listen to this. Din dechami velo mischamayim. So the one who sees but is not seen, yekabel piyuseich, should be appeased by you as well. So we'll say, so the malamed gave him a bracha. Thank you so much for going ahead, right? Because remember, Rav Oshia was concerned that for some reason that if he brought his guests to dine with the blind malamed, that the guests would not give the malamed the right kavod. So therefore he chose just not to bring them, but as a result he didn't dine with the malamed. So again, so the malamed said, you had kavod for the one who is seen but does not see. So therefore the one who sees, just the opposite. You had kavod, right, for the one who is seen but does not see. The one who sees but is not seen should have rachamim on you also. Reference to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Amrali hadam analacha. So Moshe was very taken by this bracha. So he said to them, Alama, tell me, where did you get this formulation from? Right, the one that HaKadosh Baruch Hu is the one who sees but is not seen. Listen to this. Amrali, Rabbi Elazar ben Yaakov. I said, I got it from Rabbi Elazar ben Yaakov. Also, watch this story. So Rabbi Elazar ben Yaakov. All chad the sagi nuhura lekarsi. This is such a beautiful story. Rabbi Elazar ben Yaakov, one time in his city, a particular blind man, a mashulach, right? Somebody collecting tzedakah, was a blind mashulach, came to Rabbi Elazar ben Yaakov's city. So what happened? So Rabbi Elazar ben Yaakov was concerned. Rabbi Elazar ben Yaakov knew the man, but he was concerned that because the individual was blind, that what would happen, that perhaps people would not give him the right kavod, and people would not end up contributing to him. So what did Rabbi Elazar ben Yaakov do? Yasiv le Rabbi Elazar ben Yaakov l'ra minei. Rabbi Elazar ben Yaakov sat below the blind pauper. The yemrun the ilule dahava barnash rava lo yasiv le Rabbi Elazar ben Yaakov l'ra minei. So I was saying, because that what would happen when people saw that Rabbi Elazar ben Yaakov was sitting below the blind pauper, they said to themselves, the pauper must what? Must be someone very chashuv, right? Because if he wasn't chashuv, Rabbi Elazar ben Yaakov would not be sitting below him. Avadlei parnasa diikar. So they made him the guy did very well. He did very well. Amrlon machin. So let's listen to this. So this blind pauper ultimately again, this blind pauper realized that obviously something was going on because he had never done so well in his collections before, right? He never did so well. So he said, what is it exactly that's going on over here? Amrulay Rabbi Elazar ben Yaakov Yasav l'ra minach v'tzali iluye. I'm sorry. Rabbi Elazar ben Yaakov Yasav l'ra minach. He said Rabbi Elazar ben Yaakov was sitting below you. So because he was sitting below you, and again, I want to point out, obviously you see from the story that what happened over here, Rabbi Elazar ben Yaakov never said anything to the pauper. Right? He never said Shalom Aleichem, he never said welcome. He just sat there quietly. and people saw that Rabbi Elazar ben Yaakov was there, and they gave the pauper extra money. The pauper never knew. After the fact, the pauper says, well, I never make this much money going from to a city, especially when no one knows me. So what happened over here? So we'll say, this goes back to what we saw before. Ma'ashrei maskil el dal. Rabbi Elazar ben Yaakov didn't engage, he didn't converse, he didn't do anything. He literally just sat below the blind pauper. So when the blind pauper realized what happened, he said as follows. He says, the Gemara says, Vitzaluye aluye hadat salusa. So the pauper davened the following prayer for Rabbi Elazar ben Yaakov. Ato gamalto chesed lemad demischami velo chami. You did chesed for one who is seen but cannot see. Din dechame velo mischame. The one who sees but is not seen, yigmal yasach chesed. Should do chesed with you as well. So the Ribbon Shel Olam, the one who sees but is not seen, should do chesed with you as well. So we'll say such an incredible Gemara. So therefore, again, the Gemara says that this blind Melamed, Rav Hoshia's son, gave Rav Hoshia essentially the same bracha based on the story of Rabbi Elazar ben Yaakov. And Rabbi say ultimately again, all going to the same idea of Ashrei Maskil El Dal. That especially, it's true in general in life, but especially with tzedakah, it's not just what you do, but it's all about how you do it. Incredible. So the Gemara goes weiter. The Gemara says, Rabbi Chama Bar Chanina, Rabbi Oshia, Havu Metailin Be'ilin Kinish. Rabbi says it's a very interesting story. So Rabbi Chama Bar Chanina and Rabbi Oshia were strolling amongst the shuls in Lud. Amar vechama bar Chanina Rabbi Oshia, Kama mamon shiku avosai kan. How much money did my family invest here? So apparently, again, I will say, interestingly enough, Rabbi Bar Chanina said that his family had donated many of the shuls in Lud. Amrle, Kaman nefashos shiku avosecha kan. And how many souls did your family cause to be lost here? What does that mean? Lo have is barnash the yalun ba'oraisa. Ultimately, again, were there not individuals who could have learned Torah with that same money? So we'll say, interestingly enough, what's happening over here is as follows. Rav Chama Bar Chanina is saying, my family, Baruch Hashem, was responsible for building many of the shuls in Lud. And interestingly enough, Rabbi Oshia said to him, but were there not many Jews who were destitute who needed to be supported? Could that money not have been put to better use? So the Gemara goes weiter. The Gemara says, Rabbi Bun, Avad Elaine Tare, Amud Beis, the Sadra Rava. So we'll say the Gemara says that, who is this? Rabbi Avon made beautiful doors for the Beis Midrash. So the Gemara says, Asa Rav Mana Lagabe. So Rav Mana came to visit it. Amar Le, Chami Mayavidit. Did you see the beautiful doors that I made? He was very proud of the ornate doors. Amar Le, Vayishkach Yisrael Esosehu, Vayivan Hechalos. So the Gemara says, Yisrael forgot he who made it, he who created it, and he built, or Yisrael forgot HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and they built temples. So the Gemara says, Lahava b'nei nash delilin ba'oraisa. Ultimately, again, were there not individuals, poor individuals, who could have used the money to learn Torah? So we'll say, so this is an interesting Gemara. You know, the Shulchan Aruch in Yeridea brings down, again, hierarchies for tzedakah. So we'll say this is actually quite interesting. Again, we don't have time for it now, but it's fascinating. Based on this Gemara, you know, again, this sounds a little self-serving, but you know, Shulchan Aruch brings down that actually one of the highest levels of tzedakah is supporting shuls, which is interesting. What the Gemara over here is highlighting, by the way, you could check out that halakha, you don't have to take my word for it. Right? You can see, again, it's mentioned, you can see Yeridea, Reish Mem Tes Zayin. So again, you could take, you'll take a look at it. So I'll say, but what I will point out is something very interesting. Obviously, what the Gemara is sensitizing us to is the incredible balance that one has to have in Hilchos Tzedakah. And that, again, and this in general is one of the greatest challenges in Tzedakah all the time in terms of what takes priority. What takes priority? And we'll say, obviously, unfortunately, you could donate all the Tzedakah funds in the world towards poverty, and there'll still be more poverty to battle. So what does that mean? You give all the money to tzedakah, no money to yeshivas, no money to chinuch, no money to building Jewish infrastructure. Of course, that can't be what the Gemara is saying over here. It could very well be what the Gemara is saying is that halacha l'maaseh, maybe communities have to be a little bit more aware about how resources are allocated, which would be a wonderful thing. And I will say, one of the most challenging things of not having an organized sense of community is the fact that we end up, if we had organized community, just as an aside, if we had organized community and were able to pool resources, we would be able to accomplish so much more. But because often our communities are fractured, and I will say, every single group needs their own shul, right? And every single group needs their own this, and needs their own that, and needs their own this. So again, there's a million shuls, which is nice, but not really necessary, and a million different organizations. So again, it's a good musser in terms of communal planning about how perhaps to consolidate resources to be able to make sure that money gets to where it ultimately needs to. And even when you're investing in something specific, perhaps to be mindful of what's a necessity in the project versus ultimately what's a luxury. Again, we'll see maybe if we have a little bit of time at the end of the daf, I'll go back to that Shulchan Aruch because it is quite interesting. The Gemara goes weiter. The Gemara says, Tani, Kache Mizbeach Motzina Sarai Lehemi Kache Bedek Habayis. I'm sorry, let me read that again. Tani, Kache Mizbeach Motzina Sarai Lehemi Kache Bedek Habayis. However, in Kache Bedek Habayis, Motzina Sarai Lehemi Kache Mizbeach. Suppose the interesting case. Let's say you run out of Machzis HaShekel. Let's say it turns out the Machzis HaShekel fund dries up, but you still need more money. For karbanos. So what can you do? You are permitted to dip into the Bedek Habayis fund. Very interesting halacha. So essentially, the way you could view it is, if you view it in the following way, that the Bedek Habayis fund is kind of like, like sometimes in the bank you have like overdraft protection, where, if your checking account is linked to your another account, if for some reason, so there's overdraft protection in the Beis Hamikdash as well. If you go ahead and you run out of the money in your Tiklin Chadatin, in your Machzis HaShekel, the overdraft ultimately comes from Bedek Habayis. However, the reverse is not true. If you run out of Bedek Habayis funds, you cannot take from the Machzis HaShekel fund. Interesting. So the Gemara says, however, in Kache Bedek Habayis, Motzina Sarai Lehemi Kache Mizbeach. I have a hotaninon. Klisha matzu botzorach lebedek habayis manichin also v'ashar nimkarin u'demei nofle bedek habayis. But I will say, it sounds like from the Mishnah. Remember again, what did the Mishnah say? That people would come and donate utensils. You throw your utensil into the lishkas hakelim. Once every 30 days, they would see whatever they could use for bedek habayis. They would keep everything else. They would sell, and the money falls into the bedek habayis fund. And I will say, it makes it sound like that money that goes into the bedek habayis fund remains in the bedek habayis fund and can't be used for anything else. No. All the Mishnah is talking about is money that goes into the Bedek Habayis fund. The Mishnah is not talking about what the Bedek Habayis fund could be used for. So we'll say a very important halacha that comes out. Not only is Bedek Habayis ultimately used for temple upkeep and repair of the structures of the Beis Hamikdash and surrounding areas, but ultimately, again, Bedek Habayis fund could also be served as the overdraft protection for the Machzis HaShekel fund for Karbanos Tzibur communal offerings as well. Incredible. Hadron Allah, Perek Elohim Amunim. Both say beautiful. More beautiful Gemara. Here we go. Shlosh Esrei Shofros. Both say there were 13. Remember, a shofar is a collection box, but as we're going to see, it was a uniquely shaped shofar box, collection box. There were 13 collection boxes in the Beis Hamikdash. Shlosha shulchanos, 13 tables. Shlosha shtachaviyos, 13 prostration areas. Hayu b'mikdash. Shabeis Rabbi Gamliel v'Shabeis Rabbi Chananyos kanakonim hayu mishtachavim ba'arba esrei. But interestingly enough, the members of Rabbi Chananyos kanakonim and Rabbi Gamliel's home, they also prostrated in a 14th spot. Vehechan haisi yisera. And by the way, where was the 14th prostration spot? Kineged dir ha'itzim. It was right near the chamber of wood. So I will say, I'll send this out a little bit later. I have a picture of in my Gemara of this. The dir ha'itzim. But say, if you remember again, when you go into the Beis Hamikdash, Shemirat Hashem Bikara, we'll go into the Beis Hamikdash, walking to the Ezras Nashim, which was the large courtyard area. So there were four chambers. The dir ha'itzim was when you walked in the first chamber on your right. The first chamber on your right, that was the Dir HaEtzim. So in the family of Rabbi Gamliel and the family of Rabbi Chananya Skana Kohanim, they used to prostrate themselves by the Dir HaEtzim. Why? Listen to this. We'll say this is wild. Shekein Masoris biyadam avosehen shesham ha'aron nignaz. Wow. Because we'll say they had a tradition in their families that is where the ark, the Aron Habris, was hidden. Right? When it was clear that the Beis Hamikdash was going to be destroyed, the Aron was hidden. They had a Masorah that the Aron was hidden underneath the Dir Eitzim. Incredible. We'll say this is wild. So there was once a story of a Kohen who was going ahead and working in the Beis Hamikdash, and he noticed he was in the Dir HaEtzim, and he noticed that the flooring on the Dir, on one part of the Dir HaEtzim, was different than the rest of the flooring. Bava Amr Lechavero. He went to get his friend to check out what's going on over here. Lo hispik ligmor hadavar achiyat nishmaso. And literally, he didn't finish talking about it until he died. V'yadu biyichud shesham ha'aron galus. And they realized in that moment that indeed that's where the Aron is hidden, and that Ribon Shalom did not want anyone to really know about it, and they stopped talking about it. But interestingly enough, the house they had a Masorah from the founder of Gamliel, Rabbi Chananya Skana Kohanim, that was the spot in which the Aron was hidden, and that's where they would prostrate themselves. Incredible. So Tani, we'll say, let's analyze. Hashofros halalu akumos hayu, saros milamalon, rachavos milamata, mipnei haramoin. So we'll say again, these tzedakah boxes in the Mikdash were called shofros. Why are they shaped like a shofar? Because also remember again, essentially it's like an upside down shofar. You would deposit the money in the narrow side, and the money would collect in the wide side. That way, how? That way, what would that avoid? That would avoid people who look like they're giving, but they're really taking, right? So we'll say, a person puts their hand in the tzedakah box, mishes around in there a little bit, and they might actually be taking something out. This way, because the opening is narrow, ultimately you could just put in, you can't take anything out. Incredible. So Tani b'shem Rabbi Lazar ha'aron gala iman lebavel. Suppose we listen to this now, but we're going to get into a sugya, a machlokes about, it's incredible, it's such an incredible Gemara. A machlokes, by the way, I just want to point out, you understand the incredible timing of this Gemara, incredible timing, that remember, we're talking now, we just finished Pesach, right? We were just, Rabbi Nachman writes, that even in the absence of the Beis HaMikdash, when we have the Yom Tov of Pesach, the neshama has an aliyah l'regel. That's why we feel elated. You thought it was bloated. It wasn't bloated, right? It was elation. It was spiritual elation because the neshama experiences an aliyah l'regel. And now Yom Tiv's over, and it's a little bit of a downer. And I want to hear, what are we talking about now? The Aron. We get to spend the morning together with the Aron. So what happened with the Aron? So the Gemara says, Tani b'shem Elazar, ha'aron gala imahin lebavel. We're also going to see a fundamental machlokes. The Gemara says that the Aron was exiled with us to Bavel. My timer. What does the pasuk say? Lo yivaser davar amar Hashem. So ultimately, again, because the pasuk says, HaKadosh Baruch Hu says to us in Malachim, Lo yivaser davar, nothing will be left over. A reference to the destruction of the Beis Hamikdash, nothing will be left behind. So the Gemara says, Amar Hashem, in davar, ela shadibros asocha. What's davar? What does the thing refer to? The thing refers to that which houses the luchos, the dibros, the aron. V'cheinu omer, u'letshuvas hashana shalach hamelech Nebuchadnezzar, vayevi'uha vayevi'ah bavela, im klei chemdas beis Hashem. So the pasuk says that Nebuchadnezzar brought the utensils of the Beis Hamikdash to Bavel, together with the kli chemdas beis Hashem, the treasure of the house of the Ribono Shel Olam. What? The treasure. Ezo kli chemdas beis Hashem. Zeha Aron. That refers to the ark. And therefore, again, according to this first opinion, the Gemara, Rebbe Lazar, the Aron was actually exiled with them to Bavel. Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish Omer, Bimkama haya Aron nignas. Both his incredible machlokes. Rabbi Rish Lakish says, no, the Aron was never exiled. The Aron was hidden. When it became clear that the Beis Hamikdash was going to be destroyed, the Aron was hidden in the temple compound itself. Aron nignas, Bimkama haya Aron nignas. In its place. Now, both saying, now in its place doesn't necessarily have to mean in the Kodesh HaKadoshim, but it means in its place means somewhere in the Mikdash compound itself, the Aron was hidden. So the Gemara says, Haduhu dichsiv, vayarichu habadim, vayi roshe abadim el HaKodesh al pnei advir, v'lo yira chutza. Uksiv virus. We'll say. So let me say it's a little bit of a confusing limud here. The Gemara is quoting the pasuk from Sefer Malachim. So we'll say the Torah, the Navi's talking about the badim, the poles of the Aron. Now it says that the poles remained there. Vayusham ad hayom hazeh. The poles remained there until this very day. So the Gemara says, before we get to that, so that's a raya. The fact that it says remain there to this very day indicates to us what? That the Aron is still there. As a side point, the Gemara says the poles were seen and the poles weren't seen. So the Gemara says, Va'at amart v'lo yiru, elanirin v'lo nirin. Rather, the poles were seen and they weren't seen. So the Gemara says, Boltin v'yotzin kishnei dade ha'isha. They extended, we've seen this before in Maseches Yuma, that the poles pushed against the curtain of the Kodesh HaKadoshim, just like the breasts of a woman extend out as well. V'rabbanan amri, Belishkas dir ha'itzim haya aron ganav. So we'll say, according to this opinion, halacha l'maisa, the aron remained in place. The aron remained in place, right? And ultimately, where was it hidden? Belishkas dir ha'itzim. This goes back to the Mishnah. It was hidden underneath the wood chamber. So the Gemara says, so the Gemara tells a story now, similar to the story expressed in the Mishnah. So we'll say, so just want to point out. So just to understand, the first opinion, who was Rebbe Lazar holds the Aron was exiled to Bavel. And his raya to that is because the pasuk sees that the fact that Nebuchadnezzar took with him the Kli Chemda, the treasure of the Beis Hamikdash, which must be a reference to the Aron. Second opinion says that when speaking about the badim, the poles, the Navi indicates that the badim remained in the Aron, which remained in place ad hayom hazeh. Ad hayom hazeh means for all eternity, which means the Aron was never moved out of the Mikdash. The Aron remained in the Mikdash. Okay, but if it remained in the Mikdash, it obviously didn't remain in place. It was hidden. And where was it hidden? In the dir ha'itzim, underneath the chamber of wood. So the Gemara tells another story. There was a story of a particular coin, a blemished coin. I will say now the reason it mentions a blemished coin is because a blemished coin with a mum, can't do the avoda. So what would he do in the Beis Hamikdash? So the Gemara Maseches Yoma explains what he would. We'll actually see this. He would deworm the wood. That's what Kohanim would do. They would go ahead, because remember, you always needed wood. Lishkas ha'itzim, you would always need wood. So they would make sure they would deworm the wood. That was a service that they could do. So there's a particular Kohen Babum, he was deworming wood in the Lishkas dir eitzim. He saw that the floor of the dir ha'itzim was different than the rest of the floor of the Mikdash, or he saw that an area in the dir ha'itzim had a different floor. So he said to his friend, take a look at the floor here, that the floor looks different than the rest of the floor. Lo hispik ligmar sadavar hazos, lo hispik ligmar sadavar ad shiyata sanishmaso. He didn't even get to finish his sentence until he died. V'yada biyichod shesham ha'aron ganos. And they saw for sure, they saw with certainty that this was indeed where the Aron was sitting. Clearly, HaKadosh Baruch Hu did not want anyone to explicitly know about the location of the Aron. So it kind of was a well-kept secret in the Beis Hamikdash that the Aron was hidden underneath the dir ha'itzim, and the Aron never left the Mikdash compound. I will say, so the Gemara is going to expound on this machlokes a little bit more. So the Gemara says as follows: Tanim b'shur boshia, heikesh hala bakornos, v'yatza sa'esh v'sarafto. So the Gemara says as follows: Tani Rabbi Yehuda bar Eloi ben Lakish Omer, Beis Aronos hayom ha'halchinim Yisrael b'midbar. The Rosh is incredible. There are two Arons that traveled with Klal Yisrael throughout the desert. I'm sorry, I didn't. Tani Rabbi Oshia, heikesh hala bakornos v'yatza sa'esh v'sarafto. Alternate ending of the story is that the Kohen who discovered the anomaly in the floor began to kind of hammer away at it in order to get through it, to see what was underneath this strange flooring. A spark came out from the floor and fire came out from the floor and burnt him. Either way, again, it became clear to everyone else that the Ribono Shel Olam did not want us tampering with this particular area. So we'll say, we'll begin the next sugi and then we'll stop. Rabbi Yehuda bar Eloi ben Lakish Omer, Beis Aronos hayom ha'halchin im Yisrael b'midbar. There were two arks which traveled with Klal Yisrael in the desert. One ark housed the Torah, and one housed the shivrei luchos, the broken tablets. It was an incredible approach of Rabbi Yehuda, right? Rabbi Yehuda bar Eloi. So ultimately, again, 2 arks. One which housed the complete luchos, one which housed the broken luchos. The Gemara says, Zeh shahaisa b'socha ator nesuna b'socho. Sorry, Zeh shaisa ator nesuna b'socho. Hayemunach bo al moed. The one which housed the complete luchos, that one remained in the Mishkan. Hada hu dichsiv. V'am bris Hashem Moishe LaMoshe me'ikar ha'machana. Zeh shayu shiver luchos nesuna b'socho. Hayenichnas v'yotzi mayin. Upam shay mis'ari mayin. The other one, the second ark, which housed the shivrei luchos, used to travel with Klal Yisrael. The Gemara Nichnas v'yotzei mayin would go in and out with them, which I will say b'pashtos means that, for example, when Klal Yisrael would go out to war, that ark would come with them. And sometimes again, that ark would be seen with Klal Yisrael. But Rabbanan say Aron Echad Haya. The Rabbanan disagree with Rabbi Huda ben Lokish or Bariloi, and they say Rabbanan say there was only one ark. Only one ark, upam achas yativ me'eli v'nishba, and that ark remained in the Mishkan. Only one time was it taken out during the days of Eli HaKohen, and it was captured by the Plishtim. Rabbi Silber will stop over here. We will pick up in Mirat Hashem with this machlokes about how many aronos were there and how were they used in Mirat Hashem tomorrow. All right, Chavron Zoom. Great schos to see all of you. Mamish, incredible. Hopefully everyone had a beautiful Yom Tiv. Reb Jerry, thank you for the beautiful background. Mamish, incredible. Mamish, incredible. You have to invite me there for a chavrusa. It's Hashem. I got your email about. I saw your email about the smichas chaver. I'll text you. It's Kidai.